Have you ever met someone who, on the surface, seemed perfectly kind, polite, well-spoken, maybe even generous, but somehow something just didn't feel right? You couldn't put your finger on it, but deep down, you felt uneasy around them. It's as if your intuition was whispering, "Be careful." Now let me ask you this. What if the real danger in people doesn't come from loud, obvious anger or clear hostility, but from something much quieter, something hidden, something that even they aren't fully aware of? If you're over 60 like me, then you've probably seen all types of personalities over the years. Maybe it was someone at church, maybe a neighbor, or even someone in your own family. And what we often learn with time is that the ones who cause the most harm are not always the loudest or the meanest ones. Sometimes they're the ones who believe they could never do anything wrong. They believe they're always good, always right, always kind. And that belief is exactly what makes them dangerous. Today, we're going to have a real heart-to-heart conversation, not about judging others, but about understanding what truly lies beneath the surface of human behavior, yours, mine, and the people we meet. Because the truth is, no matter your age, life keeps teaching us new lessons if we're willing to look a little deeper. So get comfortable, pour a cup of tea if you'd like, and let's talk about something that might just change how you see people and yourself forever. Now, the great Swiss psychologist believed that the most dangerous person isn't the angry man shouting on the street or the bitter woman causing drama at every turn. No. The real danger, he said, is the person who has no awareness of their own shadow, that darker side we all have inside us. Let's slow that down for a moment, because it matters. When people talk about the shadow, they don't mean evil or something we should be ashamed of. They mean the parts of ourselves that we hide, the feelings we were told not to express when we were kids, the thoughts we were taught were bad, the anger we swallowed, the sadness we denied, the jealousy we pretended we didn't feel. It's all in there, tucked away like boxes in an attic. Now you might be thinking, well, I've made peace with most of that by now. I've lived long enough. And that's fair. Many people over 60 have done the hard work, raising families, caring for loved ones, learning from mistakes. But here's the thing, we all still carry a shadow, no matter how old we are. The key difference is whether we're aware of it or not. It was believed that people who pretend they don't have any darkness, those who think they're always kind, always moral, always right, can be the most dangerous of all. Why? Because when you deny that you're capable of hurting someone, or making a mistake, or feeling jealousy or resentment, you stop watching yourself. You stop growing. And worst of all, you start projecting that darkness onto others. Have you ever known someone who was always blaming everyone else? It's her fault. He's the one with the problem. I would never do that. Sound familiar? It's a pattern you can spot when you've seen enough of life. People who can't see their own flaws tend to spend a lot of time pointing fingers. And they genuinely believe they're helping, when in reality, they're often causing pain. The first real danger is that people who deny their shadow are often completely blind to how they're acting. It's not that they're trying to hurt you on purpose. It's that they honestly think they're the good guy. And when someone believes they're always good, they don't stop to ask, wait, was that hurtful? Was I being fair? Did I go too far? They don't pause to reflect. And without that pause, harm slips in quietly. Now here's where things get even more interesting. What we don't make conscious, we act out unconsciously. In other words, the more we deny our anger, the more it shows up in our tone, our sarcasm, our need for control, or even in passive-aggressive behavior. It leaks out in ways we don't notice, but others definitely feel. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine a woman who was taught from a young age that nice girls don't get angry. So every time she felt upset, she smiled instead. Every time someone crossed a boundary, she said nothing. Over the years, that anger didn't disappear, it just sank deeper inside. And eventually, it started to come out as bitterness or silent punishment, or little jabs in conversation. She never raised her voice, but people around her felt uneasy, drained, or even afraid. The danger isn't in the feeling, it's in the denial. This can happen to any of us, especially as we age. We've been through things. We've had to be strong. We've learned to bite our tongues. And that's okay. Sometimes it's necessary. But over time, if we don't take a moment to look inside and ask ourselves, what am I holding in? What have I buried? Then that unspoken pain becomes a shadow. And if we're not careful, we can start to hurt others without meaning to. What's more, people who deny their shadow often believe they're being moral when they're actually being controlling. Think about the parent who says, "I'm just trying to help," while forcing their adult child to live a certain way. Or the friend who says, "I'm just being honest," but uses that honesty as a weapon. They believe they're being righteous, but they're actually avoiding their own discomfort. And when righteousness meets denial, it becomes a weapon. A smile can cut, a good deed can be used for guilt, a calm voice can still control. If that sounds heavy, take a breath. This isn't about blaming others or even blaming ourselves. It's about awareness. It's about waking up to a truth that can free us, not trap us. Because here's the good news. Once we begin to see our shadow, it loses its power over us. And once we accept that we are human, flawed, imperfect, and still growing, we become safer to be around. Kinder, gentler, not just with others, but with ourselves. So next time you feel that subtle discomfort around someone who seems a little too perfect, a little too certain, a little too good, listen to it. And next time you feel a sharp reaction rising in you, one that seems to come out of nowhere, pause and ask, is that a part of me I've been ignoring? The most dangerous people are not the ones who are dark. They're the ones who claim to have no darkness at all. And the safest people? They're the ones who know exactly what they're capable of and choose love anyway. Let's keep going, because we've just started to uncover something powerful together. That moment of awareness, when you catch yourself reacting too strongly or feeling too bothered by someone else's behavior, is not something to be ashamed of. It's actually an invitation, a doorway to growth. Because the more we understand what's hidden inside us, the less control it has over how we speak, how we love, and how we live. It was believed that the shadow isn't just made up of so-called bad traits. Sure, it can include anger, jealousy, or selfishness, but it also holds our forgotten strengths, hidden creativity, unexpressed courage, even the boldness we were told was too much when we were younger. In other words, it's not something to fear, it's something to befriend. But here's where it gets tricky, especially for those of us who've grown up in a culture that prizes being nice and good. We were often praised for being polite, for not rocking the boat, for putting others first. And that's not all bad. There's value in kindness and selflessness. But sometimes, the pressure to always be the good one leads us to hide parts of ourselves that are perfectly human. Think back. Maybe you've had times in your life where you had to swallow your feelings to keep the peace. Maybe you stayed silent when you wanted to scream. Or forgave someone too soon just to avoid conflict. We've all been there. And those moments can add up. They become little pieces of the shadow because we weren't allowed to express the full truth of how we felt. Now, what happens when a person does that for decades? When they build a life on the belief that being angry or wanting more or setting a boundary makes them bad? What happens is this: they lose sight of their shadow completely. And when that happens, the consequences can be subtle, but serious. People who deny their shadow don't become more peaceful. They become more fragile. The smallest criticism hurts them deeply. A disagreement feels like a personal attack. They begin to manipulate situations to keep their image intact, not because they're evil, but because they can't face the truth of who they really are. That's why it has been described as a psychological time bomb. The shadow doesn't go away. It waits. It builds. It seeps out in sarcasm, in backhanded compliments, in controlling behavior disguised as concern. And often the person doing it has no idea. They truly believe they're being loving or helpful. Let's take a step back. Imagine a man in his 70s, well respected in his community, known for being generous and calm. He volunteers, he helps out at church, he always says the right thing. But at home, his children walk on eggshells. He doesn't yell, but he controls through silence. He doesn't hit, but he withholds affection when things don't go his way. If you ask him, he'd say, "I'm a good man. I've never hurt anyone." And in many ways, he is a good man. But that denial of his own shadow, the refusal to even look at it, has caused just as much harm as if he'd raised his voice. That's the danger we're talking about. Not evil, not violence, but unawareness. Blind spots. When you believe you're only ever good, you lose the ability to apologize. You lose the ability to listen. You lose the humility that makes real connection possible. And that's the true tragedy, not just the pain it causes others, but the loneliness it creates for the person stuck in that illusion. So how do we begin to turn the tide? The first step is simple, but powerful. You start by saying to yourself, "There are things in me I haven't looked at yet, and that's okay." That one sentence unlocks the door. It shifts your energy from defensiveness to curiosity. And curiosity is what allows us to grow. The second step is to notice your reactions, not to judge them, but to learn from them. When something upsets you more than it should, or when you feel the urge to prove you're right, pause. Ask gently, "What am I really feeling here? What might I be afraid to admit?" This isn't about beating yourself up. It's about growing up in the best sense of the word. Becoming wiser, becoming more honest, becoming whole. And here's the beauty of it all. Once you start to see your own shadow, you also begin to soften toward others. You stop needing to fix everyone. You stop blaming. You start recognizing that everyone is carrying something. And that makes you more compassionate, more grounded, more real. Now let's talk about something that adds another layer to this conversation. Something that has been warned about quite clearly. The illusion of moral superiority. See, it's one thing to be unaware of your flaws. That's common. But when you believe you don't even have any flaws, when you see yourself as completely moral, always kind, always wise, that's when the real danger shows up. Because now, not only are you blind to your shadow, you've convinced yourself it doesn't exist. And when people believe they're pure, they often feel entitled to judge others. You've probably seen it before. The person who says, "I'm just telling you the truth," but their truth feels more like a slap. Or the friend who means well, but always seems to leave you feeling smaller than before. That's what happens when someone's righteousness goes unchecked. They start using goodness as a weapon, and they don't even realize they're doing it. It happens in families, it happens in churches, it happens in politics. And yes, it happens in ourselves too, if we're not careful. This is why humility matters. Humility is not thinking you're worthless. It's knowing you're human. And being human means you have a shadow. So do I. So does everyone. When you understand that, you stop needing to be perfect. You stop needing others to be perfect too. You make room for honesty, for forgiveness, for real conversations. You might be wondering, well, how does this really affect my life now? I'm past the age of workplace drama, parenting young kids, and climbing ladders. That's true. But the shadow doesn't retire when you do. In fact, retirement often gives it more space to rise, more time to reflect, more chances to face the things we've avoided for years. And in this stage of life, you're given a gift, not just the time to look inward, but the wisdom to do so with grace. You don't have to rush it. You don't have to be afraid of what you find. Because as you look at those hidden parts, you'll discover not just pain, but power. Yes, your shadow may hold anger, but it may also hold your voice, your truth, your fire, the passion you once tucked away to keep things calm. And now, maybe for the first time, you can bring that part of you into the light, not to cause harm, but to bring healing. This is not about changing who you are. It's about reclaiming the parts of you that got lost along the way. And the more you do that, the more your relationships shift. People feel safer around you. They trust you more. Because when you own your flaws, you don't have to hide. You don't have to pretend. And that's when real connection happens, heart to heart, soul to soul. So take this as encouragement. Oh, you don't have to fear your shadow. You don't have to run from it. All you need is the courage to say, I'm still learning. Because the people who are still learning are the ones who grow. And the ones who grow, they are the ones who truly live. Let's keep going. As you sit with these ideas, you may notice something subtle beginning to shift inside you. Not discomfort, but clarity. A quiet understanding that self-awareness is not about tearing yourself down, but about finally standing on solid ground. When people spoke about the shadow, they weren't warning us to fear ourselves. They were inviting us to become whole. At this stage of life, wholeness matters more than achievement. You've already proven yourself in countless ways. You've survived losses, celebrated joys, raised families, built careers, and weathered storms you never thought you could. What remains now is not the need to impress, but the desire to live honestly, peacefully, and with meaning. This is where the psychological and spiritual significance of shadow awareness truly comes into focus. When you accept that you have light and darkness within you, something remarkable happens. You stop being at war with yourself. You no longer need to defend every decision or justify every feeling. You begin to see emotions not as enemies, but as messengers. Anger becomes a signal that a boundary has been crossed. Sadness becomes a reminder of what you value. Even envy can quietly point toward a longing you never allowed yourself to name. This kind of awareness brings a deep sense of calm, not the fragile calm of repression, but the steady calm of understanding. And that calm changes how you show up in the world. You listen more. You react less. You choose your words with care, not because you're afraid of conflict, but because you understand its weight. You know that every interaction carries energy, and you're mindful of what you bring into the room. Spiritually speaking, it's been suggested that ignoring the shadow leads to a kind of blindness. Not blindness of the eyes, but of the soul. When someone insists they are always right, always good, always moral, they cut themselves off from growth. They stop learning. And without learning, the spirit becomes rigid. But when you acknowledge your shadow, humility naturally follows. And humility opens the door to wisdom. Wisdom doesn't shout. It doesn't dominate conversations. It doesn't need to win. Wisdom sits quietly and observes. It asks questions instead of making assumptions. It understands that every person is carrying a story you may never fully know. This is especially powerful in your relationships. When you're aware of your own capacity for hurt, you become gentler with others. You stop needing to control their choices. You let go of the urge to fix them. Instead, you meet them where they are, with curiosity rather than judgment. And here's something many people don't realize until later in life. This awareness doesn't make you weaker. It makes you safer. Safer to be around. Safer to trust. Safer to love. People feel it when someone has done this inner work. They may not be able to explain it, but they sense it. Conversations feel easier. Tension fades faster. There's room to breathe. You might even notice that old conflicts soften. Not because others have changed, but because you have. You no longer take everything personally. You recognize when someone else is acting from their own shadow, and instead of reacting, you respond with boundaries or compassion, or sometimes with quiet distance. And that too is wisdom. This doesn't mean you excuse harmful behavior. Awareness is not passivity. In fact, it gives you clearer judgment. When you know what darkness looks like inside yourself, you can recognize it in others without being drawn into it. You stop confusing charm with character. You stop mistaking politeness for kindness. You trust your instincts because they're no longer clouded by denial. And perhaps most importantly, you give yourself permission to be human. You don't need to be endlessly patient. You don't need to be endlessly forgiving. You don't need to be endlessly strong. You're allowed to feel tired. You're allowed to feel frustrated. You're allowed to say no. The shadow isn't something to conquer. It's something to understand. And understanding brings freedom. If you take just one thing away from this conversation, let it be this. The most dangerous people are not those who struggle with darkness, but those who deny it exists. And the safest, most grounded people are the ones who can say, honestly, I know what I'm capable of, and I choose differently. That choice matters, every day. As you move forward, I invite you to reflect gently. When something stirs you, pause. When you feel certain you're right, take a breath. When you feel defensive, get curious. These small moments of awareness add up. They shape your character. They shape your peace. And if any of this resonates with you, I'd truly love to hear your thoughts. Share your experiences or reflections in the comments below. This stage of life holds incredible wisdom, and your voice matters more than you may realize. If you found value in this conversation, please take a moment to like the video. It helps this message reach others who may need it. And don't forget to subscribe to Strong Elderly Life for more thoughtful, supportive content designed to help you live with clarity, confidence, and purpose at any age. Thank you for spending this time with me. Here's to self-awareness. Here's to growth. And here's to living the rest of your life, not in fear of your darkness, but in peace with your whole self.